I've spent my entire life watching politicians give interviews. I've seen them break into sweat under pressure. I've watched them dodge questions, deflect attention, and desperately try to shift topics when things get uncomfortable. I've observed leaders from every side stumble through the most basic questions about their own policies. And let me tell you, after everything I've witnessed in politics, especially in recent years, what I just saw from Canada genuinely made me stop and think, this wasn't your typical political interview. This wasn't some carefully orchestrated media moment designed to avoid controversy. This was something completely different. This was a leader who actually sounded like he knew exactly what he was doing. And with everything happening right now, that kind of clarity, that calmness, that confidence, it stands out in a way that demands attention. I'm talking about Mark Carney's year-end interview. And honestly, it's one of the most striking political moments I've seen in years. Not striking in a theatrical way. Mind you, that's exactly what made it so powerful. There was no drama here, no loud shouting, no chest beating or name calling to distract from real substance. Instead, there was something increasingly rare in politics today, a leader speaking with precision, patience, and what I can only call genuine strategic vision. Before we go any further, hit that subscribe button right now, because this kind of deep political analysis doesn't show up anywhere else, and you're going to want to catch every single breakdown I do. The contrast with what we've been experiencing couldn't be sharper, and I believe that, and exactly what he wanted everyone to notice. He wanted the world watching. He wanted Americans paying attention. And frankly, having analyzed it closely, I think he succeeded brilliantly. The interview opened with a question cutting straight to the core issue. With midterm elections approaching and courts potentially ruling on tariff legality, the interviewer essentially asked whether the strategy might simply be to wait things out, to let events unfold naturally, to run down the clock until chaos resolves itself somehow. Most politicians would have danced elegantly around that question. They would have offered safe platitudes about respecting democratic processes or hoping for constructive dialogue. He did neither. His response was direct and devastating in its simplicity. He said, and I'm capturing his essence here, that rushing into a bad deal is certainly not the strategy. That's where discipline comes in. And then he revealed something, showing their entire approach. He explained that every single week passing by means developing economic strategy at home, building relationships abroad, getting stronger continuously. Think carefully about what he's actually communicating there. Time favors them, not their counterpart. Patience isn't weakness. Patience is genuine power. What impressed me most was what he didn't do. No shouting, no threatening, no fist pounding or voice raising or theatrical strength displays we've grown accustomed to. He simply stated facts calmly, clearly, letting implications speak for themselves. They're getting stronger every single week. This continues, building global relationships, developing capabilities, and reducing dependence. And meanwhile, what's happening elsewhere? Chaos, uncertainty, legal challenges, political turbulence, markets swinging wildly based on whatever impulsive statement emerges on any given morning. He didn't need to explicitly point any of that out. The contrast made itself obvious. That's the hallmark of genuinely sophisticated communication. Sometimes the most powerful statement is what you never say aloud. If this is blowing your mind right now, smash that like button. Seriously, just take 1 second and hit it, because it then came what I consider one of the most significant policy revelations embedded here. He discussed defense spending, the $80 billion being invested in military capabilities. But it wasn't just the amount catching my attention. It was the destination of that money. For decades, literally for generations, most defense equipment came from one place. 70 cents of every defense dollar, according to him, went to contractors down south. That arrangement made perfect sense in a world where partnerships were built on mutual trust and shared values. But he made abundantly clear that they no longer believe that world exists. That era is ending. Those defense dollars are now staying home developing domestic industry, building sovereign capability, creating local jobs. This isn't just about military hardware. This is about sovereignty, about a nation deciding it can no longer afford dependence on a partner proving itself unreliable. And that, more than anything else revealed here, tells you exactly how much damage has occurred to this relationship. Let me pause on that because I think people need to understand what's actually unfolding. This isn't some temporary political spat that'll blow over once everyone calms down. This is fundamental reorientation of strategic thinking. They're actively working to reduce dependence in every dimension: economic, military, political, building relationships with other partners worldwide, investing in their own capabilities rather than relying on external systems, contractors, and goodwill. And they're doing all this not because they wanted to, not because they ever desired the relationship to deteriorate this far, but because they've concluded they simply cannot rely anymore. When your closest ally, the country with whom you share the longest undefended border on Earth, decides they need to hedge against you, build alternatives to depending on you, that reveals something profound about how far things have fallen. Drop a comment right now telling me which country you're watching from. I read every single comment, and I want to know where my audience is tuning in from. What he revealed next genuinely surprised me, and I don't surprise easily when it comes to politics. He discussed how conservative members of parliament, people who built entire careers opposing the other party, have actually crossed over to support his government. Now, I've been around long enough to know party switching happens. It's not unheard of. Politicians occasionally cross aisles for various reasons, some principled, some purely opportunistic. But the way he described what's happening suggests something far more significant than typical political maneuvering. He made clear these MPs weren't lured or courted traditionally. They came willingly. They approached his government, not the other way around. They were attracted, as he put it, by what the government is actually accomplishing. That distinction matters enormously when opposition politicians voluntarily abandon their own party to support a leader from the other side. It reveals something important about political gravity in that nation. It tells you that even people who might disagree on policy, who spent years fighting on ideological grounds, have concluded this particular moment requires something different. They've concluded the situation is serious enough that partisan considerations must take a backseat to national interest. I found myself reflecting on what it would take for something similar to happen elsewhere. Can you imagine opposition members voluntarily defecting to support leadership? Not because they were promised positions or contributions or usual enticements, but simply because they believed the country needed steady leadership in crisis. I struggle to picture it, honestly. Political culture has become so tribal, so consumed by, but apparently it's actually happening there. Opposition MPs are looking at this leader, his calm demeanor, clear strategy, disciplined approach to an extraordinarily difficult situation. And they're concluding this is the leadership needed, right? Now they're deciding that even if they disagree on various policy matters, the alternative is worse. And watching this, there's something both admirable and painful about seeing that kind of pragmatism in action. It reminds me what politics could be if people actually took governing seriously. The interviewer pressed him on his identity, noting he didn't used to describe himself this way. He acknowledged the shift with refreshing honesty. He admitted, yes, he is now in politics, but he added he's still a pragmatist. That combination, political figure and pragmatist, isn't something we see very often. Most are skilled at the political game, but seem to have forgotten, or perhaps never learned, how to actually solve problems and accomplish things. They know how to win elections, raise money, and attack opponents, generate outrage, and harvest it for partisan advantage. But ask them to actually govern, make difficult decisions, build coalitions around practical solutions, and many seem completely lost. This leader, by contrast, came to politics from a completely different background. He ran major financial institutions. He navigated multiple financial crises and earned a reputation for competence and steady judgment in extraordinarily difficult circumstances. He wasn't trained in political posturing. He was trained in actually managing complex systems and getting things done. And you can see that difference in how he carries himself, answers questions, approaches the entire enterprise of leading a nation. Stop right here and subscribe if you haven't already. This video is packed with insights you won't get anywhere else. And there's so much. What I found particularly compelling was his assessment of where things stand 9 months in. He didn't hedge or qualify or offer usual disclaimers. He stated flatly, things are in a better position now than when he took office. The economy is better. There's a plan. They're implementing that plan, making progress internationally, becoming more independent as a country. Now, you might say every politician claims things are going well under their leadership. That's true to some extent. But there was something about how he said it that conveyed genuine conviction rather than political spin. He wasn't puffing himself up or taking credit for things he didn't do. He was simply describing, in his characteristically calm and factual manner, the trajectory he believes they're on. And given everything I've observed about how he conducts himself, I'm inclined to believe he actually means it. He genuinely believes they're getting stronger, more capable, more independent. And honestly, watching political dysfunction and chaos and uncertainty elsewhere, I don't find that claim hard to believe at all. Then came what might be the most consequential revelation in the entire interview. And I want to make sure people understand just how significant this is. He explained that virtually everybody in the world wants to do more with them right now. He wasn't exaggerating for effect. He wasn't engaging in wishful thinking. He laid out specific examples, making the case undeniably clear. Asian countries want partnerships. The Philippines, Thailand, Singapore, entire regional blocks representing almost a quarter of global GDP. Indonesia wants partnerships. The European Union wants partnerships. The United Kingdom wants partnerships. The Gulf states want partnerships. And then he dropped what I consider the most stunning detail of all. The United Arab Emirates has committed to investing $70 billion. $70 billion. And according to him, they didn't even ask for it. They volunteered. They came because they want to be partners with a country that has what the world wants, values the world respects, offers reliability and stability and predictability at a time when those qualities are in desperately short supply. If you're getting value from this breakdown, do me a favor and hit that like button right now. It takes you 1 second, but it makes a massive difference in getting this video out to more people who need to see it. Think about what that means in the broader context of global affairs. For decades, one country was the indispensable nation, the country everyone wanted to work with, invest in, partner with, stability, rule of law, predictable institutions. These were the greatest strategic assets. They made that nation attractive to allies and investors alike. They gave leverage in every negotiation because everyone knew deals would be honored. Commitments meant something. Institutions would outlast any particular administration. But what's being described here suggests that calculus is shifting in real time. The world is looking at certain situations and seeing chaos, unpredictability, tariffs imposed on whims, allies treated like adversaries, fundamental norms violated daily. And then they're looking elsewhere and seeing something very different, seeing stability, seeing reliability, seeing a government with a coherent plan and discipline to execute it. And they're making rational decisions based on that contrast, choosing alternatives. Not because those alternatives are perfect, not because they've suddenly become superpowers, but because they're offering something that seems no longer capable of being provided elsewhere. Trust. I want to spend time on something he said that really crystallized this shift in global position, because I think it illustrates just how dramatically the landscape. He talked about the coalition of the willing supporting Ukraine. Now, that phrase has particular resonance for those who Remember the lead up to certain military interventions. Back then, one nation assembled its own coalition of the willing. They were the ones doing the assembling. They were the ones setting the agenda. They were the indispensable nation around which other countries organized themselves. But look at what's happening now. There's a coalition of the willing supporting Ukraine, and one major power is not a member. Let me say that again because I think it bears repeating. There is an international coalition working to support Ukraine, to help shape the possibility of lasting peace, and a major power is not part of it. Other nations are, major European countries are, Australia is, the United Kingdom is, but under current administration, one nation has stepped back from that role, abdicated its position, and others, along with allies, have stepped into vacuum left behind. Comment below and tell me what you think about this massive power shift happening right now. Are you seeing this the same way I am? Let's discuss this because I'm genuinely curious about your perspective. This represents something far more significant than a single policy disagreement. It represents fundamental reordering of how the democratic world organizes itself. For generations, the assumption was always the same: one power leads, everyone else follows. That power, those resources, that diplomatic weight, these were the foundation on which international coalitions were built. But when that power stops leading, when it becomes unreliable, when it starts treating allies as adversaries and adversaries as friends, other countries have to adapt. And they have to find new ways of organizing themselves. They have to build coalitions without it. And that's exactly what's happening right now. He described their role in this new reality, not with arrogance or triumphalism, but with sober recognition of what the moment demands. They're helping shape international outcomes. Not because they sought this role, not because they ever wanted to replace established leadership, but because someone has to do it. Someone has to step up. And if one power won't, then allies will figure out how to proceed without them. What makes this particularly striking is the contrast in how he handles pressure compared to what we're the grown accustomed to seeing. In the interviewer at one point essentially called him a hypocrite. This was about the memorandum of understanding with Alberta regarding pipeline expansion. After spending so much of his career warning about climate change, after building a reputation as someone deeply concerned about environmental issues, here he was backing an expansion of oil sands. The journalist didn't soften the accusation. He asked directly whether he looked like a hypocrite. Now, I've seen countless politicians faced with that kind of pointed challenge, and the responses almost always follow a predictable pattern. They get defensive, they get angry, they attack the premise of the question, and they accuse the interviewer of bias or unfairness. And they do everything they can to avoid actually engaging with the substance of the accusation. He did none of that. He stayed completely composed. He didn't raise his voice or show any sign of being rattled. He simply laid out his reasoning in clear, logical terms. His explanation was genuinely sophisticated, and I say that as someone who has followed climate and energy policy debates for many years. He started with the basic reality that the world is going to use hydrocarbons for coming decades. That's not a wish or a preference. That's just the factual reality under virtually any scenario, including the most aggressive climate action scenarios modeled even under net zero projections. The world will still be using 25 to 30 million barrels of oil per day, down from 100 million, yes, but still substantial. Given that reality, he argued the question becomes, what kind of oil will be used? And his answer was clear: low cost, low risk, low carbon. That last point, low carbon, is what makes the agreement defensible in his view. At the center of the memorandum is a project that will remove 16 megatons of carbon from oil production. That's the equivalent, he explained, of taking 90% of cars and trucks off the road. In other words, if the world is going to keep using oil, regardless of what one country does, better that it be oil produced with minimal carbon emissions than oil produced in countries with far worse environmental standards. You may agree with that logic or you may disagree with it. That's a legitimate policy debate. and reasonable people can come down on different sides. But what you cannot deny is that he clearly knows what he's talking about. He wasn't winging it. He wasn't making things up. He wasn't trying to change the subject or attack the interviewer for asking an uncomfortable question. He engaged directly with the substance, laid out his reasoning, acknowledged the tensions and trade-offs involved, and defended his position with evidence and logic. That's what actual leadership looks like. That's what it means to take policy seriously rather than treating every question as just another opportunity for political theater. And watching it from here, watching it after years of politics dominated by bluster and bullying and proud ignorance, I found it genuinely refreshing. I found myself thinking, and this is what it looks like when a country is led by someone who actually understands complex issues and can articulate coherent strategies for addressing them. If you stuck with me this far, make sure you subscribe because I'm breaking down political moments like this regularly. And trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. The environmental dimension of this interview deserves more attention because it illustrates something important about how he approaches difficult trade-offs. Climate change is real. The science is clear. The risks are enormous. He has spent years warning about these dangers, and there's no reason to doubt his genuine commitment to addressing them. But he also recognizes that governing a real country with a real economy and real people whose livelihoods depend on fossil fuel industries requires more than ideological purity. It requires finding ways to transition toward a cleaner future while also meeting the needs of the present. It requires acknowledging that you can't simply shut down industries overnight and expect everything to work out. It requires the kind of pragmatic incremental progress that purists on both sides often dismiss, but that actually produces real improvements in the real world. That's the approach he's taking. And whether you agree with every specific decision or not, it's hard to deny that it reflects a serious engagement with the genuine complexity of these issues. What I kept coming back to throughout this interview was the sheer contrast in temperament and approach between him and the leader who has created this entire crisis. On one side, you have constant chaos, impulsive tariffs, attacks on allies, embrace of authoritarians, complete lack of coherent strategy or disciplined execution. On the other side, you have calm, patience, clear articulation of goals and methods, willingness to engage substantively with difficult questions. It's not just a difference in policy, it's a difference in a fundamental approach to leadership. One side seems to believe that strength is demonstrated through volume and aggression, through dominating every interaction, through never admitting error or uncertainty. The other seems to believe that strength is demonstrated through competence and consistency, through having a plan and executing it, through building genuine capabilities rather than just talking about them. These are fundamentally different visions of what leadership means. And watching them play out side by side, it's hard for me to see how anyone could look at the evidence and conclude that chaos is producing better results. As I reflect on everything I witnessed in this interview, I keep returning to one inescapable conclusion. We're watching a fundamental shift in how Canada sees itself and its place in the world. And that shift has profound implications, not just for Canada, but for the entire international order that has prevailed since the end of World War II for decades. The relationship between these two countries operated on certain assumptions everyone took for granted. Canada was the junior partner. Canada was the quieter voice. Canada was protected by proximity to power and could therefore afford to focus on other priorities while someone else handled the heavy lifting of global leadership. Those assumptions are no longer operative. What was demonstrated in this interview is that Canada has concluded correctly, in my view, that it can no longer rely on its neighbor in the way it once did. And rather than lamenting that reality or waiting passively for sense to prevail, Canada is adapting. Canada is building its own strength. Canada is forging its own partnerships. Canada is charting its own course. The strategic patience articulated throughout this interview represents a sophisticated understanding of leverage and timing that seems completely absent from policy elsewhere right now. One approach to international relations is fundamentally transactional and short-term. Impose tariffs and expect immediate capitulation, make threats and expect instant compliance. He, by contrast, is playing a longer game. He understands that Canada doesn't need to win every battle today. Canada just needs to keep getting stronger, keep building capabilities, keep developing relationships, keep demonstrating reliability to the rest of the world. Every week that passes without a bad deal is a week that Canada uses to improve its position. Eventually, the pressure will be on the other side, not on Canada. Eventually, courts may rule on whether these tariffs are even legal, and when that moment comes, Canada will be in a stronger position than it is today, not a weaker one. That's strategic patience. That's discipline. That's the kind of thinking that actually produces favorable outcomes in complex negotiations. What struck me most of all about this interview was something intangible but unmistakable. It was the sense that Canada has finally discovered its own power and is no longer afraid to exercise it. For so long, Canada was defined in relation to its southern neighbor. So Canada was the kinder, gentler version. Canada was always compared, always measured, always understood primarily in terms of how it differed from its larger neighbor. But what I heard in this interview was something different. This was a leader who wasn't defining Canada in relation to anyone else. This was a leader who was describing what Canada is, what Canada wants, what Canada is building on Canada's own terms. That's a profound shift in national consciousness. That's a country that has grown up, that has matured, that has come into its own. And frankly, it should give everyone pause, because if even Canada, the closest ally, the country sharing the longest undefended border in the world, has concluded that it needs to chart its own course independently, what does that say about where we stand in the world? Before you go, hit that like button. If this analysis opened your eyes to something you hadn't considered before, and subscribe, because I'm bringing you this level of breakdown consistently. Don't miss out. The interview ended, but the implications continue to resonate. Canada sounds different now. Canada sounds confident and clear and purposeful. Canada sounds like a country that finally understands its power and is ready to use it. Meanwhile, elsewhere, there's chaos. There's unpredictability. There's a leadership style that mistakes volume for strength and confusion for strategy. Watching this interview, watching the calm competence on display, watching a leader who actually seems to know what he's doing, I found myself hoping that we might someday find our way back to that kind of leadership ourselves. But hope is not a strategy. And right now, it's Canada that has the strategy